Just this morning at around 6:30, my kitchen at home was raided by a baboon who opened up all of my fridges and freezers, all of the cupboards, even the cutlery drawers, made away with an avo and a packet of noodles. So now you can see if the animals in the environment here can wreak such havoc on a kitchen at home, can you just imagine what they can do to a campsite? So careful consideration of where I pitch my camp and considering the animals as well as the elements in the environment can be the difference between me waking up somewhere downriver tomorrow morning or coming back to my campsite and finding a baboon sitting in my chair and drinking my cup of coffee. There are four main things that I usually take into consideration when picking a site to pitch, whether it's a campsite or just a picnic spot for the day. The first of which is water. The second one is natural threats in the environment, things like widowmakers or branches that can fall from the trees and injure you. Thirdly, I look at what the elements are doing, and then lastly, what animals or animal tracks and spoors in the environment. Now, all of these overlap slightly, but they are worth mentioning separately. The first of those elements that I consider is water. And people underestimate the danger that there is in camping on riverbanks or in the bend of a river. The bend of a river being the most likely place that's going to flood if that river's level suddenly rises. And river levels can actually rise quite quickly sometimes. And it happens when there's a storm somewhere up in the mountains, or a dam wall has broken, or there's been a mudslide and it's pushed a whole lot of water and it's displaced the water and moved it downriver, then you might find your campsite flooding. I see these wonderful pictures of people who've pitched campsites right in the middle of a river, on a little raft or on an island, and it looks so stunning. But I've always got a lump in my throat because what happens when that river floods? Ideally, we do want to be close to a river because we want access to water, but 50 meters to 100 meters is a safe distance. The other thing that I've got to take into consideration is if I'm camping on a riverbank, that river is also water to all of the animals in the environment. So they're going to come traipsing through my campsite to get to the water. Now, I'm currently standing pretty much in a riverbed because the river's level is so low at the moment. And you can see on the banks where the water's level usually is. If I go and I pitch a tent right here, there's a high chance that I'm going to get washed downriver at some or the other point. So this little beach behind me can look like a pristine place for me to set up camp, but it can actually be quite dangerous because it's on the bend of a river. So it's most likely to flood out of all the areas in this river. And you can see where the tide has recently pushed the river's level up. Yes, I said tide. This river runs out into the ocean not too far from here, and every time the tide comes in, the river's water level also rises with it. So even just for setting up a picnic spot for the day, this can be quite a dangerous spot because if the tide comes in, you'll end up with a lot of water and not so much beach. There are some threats in the environment that I need to take into consideration too, and it can be anything from widowmakers like this branch that's fallen off the tree behind me to the prickly substrate that I need to keep on tiptoeing around. Around here I've also got to keep an eye out for poachers or any sign that poachers have passed by. Not too long ago I saw a picture of someone who had set up a tarp underneath a tree like this, and a small branch just like this one had torn through the tarp when it fell on it, and the reason why it tore the tarp is because it had a sharp tip just like that. So even small branches can be a threat to us and can pose a threat to our campsite. Other things that we need to look around for are things like spiders who tend to be in the trees, or snakes. In South Africa we've got quite a bit of boomslang or tree snake, and they are very poisonous snakes. Even though they're skittish and they'll move away, it is something to take into consideration when pitching your camp under trees. So now I've told you the story about how the baboon raided my kitchen this morning, but a couple of years ago we were camping in Sudwana up near the Mozambican border, and our camp got raided by a whole lot of monkeys too. And we can't just keep on removing the animals in order to make space for ourselves. We have to learn how to live with them. And we can easily end up setting up camp on a game trail because game trails tend to run through clearings where it's easy to move, and it can seem like a good place to set up a campsite. So I usually look around for any tracks or scat, any signs of animal activity before I pick a campsite, because I don't really want the animals to all travel through my camp. Firstly, they're going to raid me of my food, and secondly, they're going to mess up the campsite and they could pose a risk to me. Behind me is what looks like an otter's den. So any sort of area that looks like the grass has been flattened or someone has gone and made a bed for you or made your campsite for you can easily be an animal's den. So good to avoid those kinds of areas and to know if there is some or the other den in the area of your campsite so that you can keep an eye out for the animals or move away from that area. And it's not just the big animals that can be a threat to us. Things like spiders or scorpions, or the likelihood that you're going to find snakes in the area where you're setting up your camp, can all be things that we need to consider. Especially if you've got snakes like we do here in South Africa. We've got adders who just don't move out of the way. They just lie there and wait for you to step on them, or move nearby them and then they'll strike you. I really do like to set up my campsite nearby a tree or something that affords me a bit of shelter from the elements, because out on the plains we can get hammered by the wind or by the rain, especially if there's bad weather incoming. But we do still have to consider things like landslides or mudslides. So hedges, for example, can make good natural shelters. But once again, we've got to take into consideration what lives in those hedges. So if you, for example, find a hollowed out tree or somewhere where there are a lot of bats, like a cave, for example, the guano from those bats can actually pose a risk to your health. It can make you quite ill. That's to safe camping. Thank you for watching, and comment below what your experiences have been with camping and animals. I love to hear from you guys. Until the next time, live ready. And horseflies.